You'll have to apologise for the slapdash nature of this video, as I'm currently recording this in the departure lounge at Gatwick Airport. Of course, Rishi Sunak decides to choose when I'm going on holiday to call the election, but obviously with plenty of election coverage to come. Yes, the election has been called. Just want to give my first kind of reaction to the speech that we heard from Rishi Sunak, which will give us a clue to kind of where the election is going to go. Before that, I'd also like to talk about how kind of funny it is to see Rishi Sunak stand in front of number 10, slowly getting drenched with water. It's like, well, if that isn't a really good summation of Rishi Sunak's premiership so far, I don't kind of know what is, which was great to see. But there were kind of three main themes that we saw specifically throughout Rishi Sunak's speech today, which was, first of all, their kind of achievements he tried to go through, which he tried to temper by saying, oh, we've gone through the coronavirus pandemic and we had the war in Ukraine. And I'm like, well, they still show the failure of Conservative policy in terms of how we deal with all of the bottlenecks from COVID, how we deal with, for example, the energy system and the energy problems that we had during the Ukraine war and the energy price spike, and how they bailed out the energy companies rather than windfall taxing them properly, for example. And he obviously brings up like furlough, something he did when he basically had to get pressured into doing it by Boris Johnson anyway. And when on top of that, when you look at, for example, the second kind of statement he made was this kind of scare tactic, this scaremongering thing that he did, where he specifically said, well, this election is going to be about how dangerous the world is going to be. Oh, we've got scary Islamists. We've got all of the hate marches on the streets, for example. Really kind of weaponising a bunch of kind of cultural sentiments about this. Probably trying to paint Labour as being soft on defence, for example. So they're going to be painting him as soft on things like keeping the country safe from people like Vladimir Putin, for example, or trying to paint the Labour Party as being too pro-Palestinian, even though, of course, the majority of this country is at this point. The majority of this country think that Israel's committing war crimes, for example. Didn't mention any of the other kind of scaremongering things about like genderism or whatever that he might have done, so at least that's a plus point. But it's very clear that the dividing line they want to choose, it's why they've been banging on about defence spending, it's why they've been banging on about like national security threats, for example, is because they want to try and paint Labour as being soft in terms of how they deal with national security, because that's something that Jeremy Corbyn was seen to be soft on by the public, but it looks like, given the current statements that's been made by the Labour Party, that they don't actually want to be seen that way. I think they've kind of shaken off that image, so I don't think that line will fly. And their main message, really, I think, is going to be finishing the job or getting on with the plan. Stick with the plan is working. If you get Labour, they have no plan, which is true, they have very little actual plans, but they do have more than nothing. The issue, of course, is that the Conservative plan isn't working. That you can't really run an election campaign on, well, you need to trust our plan, inflation is coming down, when wages aren't really increasing as much as they should be to get back to where prices were in terms of the cost of living from before the pandemic. And on top of that, energy bills are set to skyrocket again because of stupid privatisation. Water bills are going to go up again because of the fact that they let them get away scot-free and not going to nationalise, like emergency nationalise a bunch of these things, are they? So the cost of living crisis isn't even going to be over. It's really difficult for you to go to the public and say, well, you should trust us to continue with the job that we've been doing when people are still feeling the pinch. You try to go towards that in the statement by saying, well, some people's bills are going to still be somewhat high and they're still going to have see little in their bank account, but what are you doing to remedy that? What are you doing to remedy the fact that people's wages still aren't where they should be? Because you've implemented loads of supply-side labour market reforms. You even said, well, we've got this new welfare system. Yeah, that's going to reduce people's wages because of the way that you're not competing anymore with people who run welfare payments as an employer. Like, that's a supply-side labour market reform. So we can't even say that that's going to, quote-unquote, finish the job. And then by saying, well, Labour don't have a plan, your plan's been shit. You've been in government for 4.5 years. What's happened other than you've made people worse off? The entire country worse off. So those are kind of the three main things that we're going to see, is that they kind of try and shy away from running on their achievements because they don't really have any, or fuck all achievements, and try and go the scaremongering route. Because that's the last gasp, really, isn't it? The last gasp of desperate government is to say, you can't elect anybody other than us because we were the only people who can protect you. Which is dangerous. There's dangerous places to go to, and, I don't have any confidence that the Conservative Party won't indeed conduct a general election campaign that's incredibly cynical in painting anybody who's there as opponents as being dangerous, being in league with the Islamists, in league with Vladimir Putin needing to spend all of this money on all of these weapons that's apparently going to be very useful for the country, even though we're not going to get invaded. And the fact that we already spend a huge amount on defence anyway, far more than other countries, because our GDP is so high given our NATO requirements for defence spending. So none of these are going to land with the public. What they really want to see is action on the NHS, action on the cost of living crisis, and they failed on both of these counts. They've even failed at stopping the boats, which is another high voter concern. They failed at that. The Rwanda flights are doing nothing. It's not really acting as a deterrent. So they can't even run on the achievements for the people in their own base, let alone reaching across the aisle to other people. It'll be interesting to see where Labour end up with all of this, how they're going to deflect these attacks. I mean, they probably will say, well, look, how you can say about national security when all this is happening on your watch, I guess. We are the ones who are being fiscally responsible. It's irresponsible for you to have extra defence spending, for example, or do any more tax cuts. Like, they run on this idea of, well, we did all these tax cuts, you should vote for us. I'm like, well, it wasn't even much from many of the people whose votes you actually need to get on lower incomes if they want to try and remain in any sort of political relevancy. And Reform UK can seize on all of these things by saying, well, we want these increase in the tax-free allowance for the people that you're not winning over. We will actually try and stop the votes. We'll actually reduce immigration. So it's clear they're trying to play towards older generations and their base, but a lot of these people have all been brought off to Reform UK anyway. So I think that it's going to be a pretty dead-end campaign for Rishi Sunak. And then the Labour attack lines right themselves because it's what they've been for the last 6 months or so. So anyway, interesting announcement, interesting campaign to come. The question is, of course, who should you vote for? Who should you support in the next election? And anyone watching my channel will know, I think we should vote for the Green Party because we should nationalise our public services back to where they should be in public hands, like our water delivery, for example. We need to tax the rich to deal with the cost of living crisis, to have a proper welfare state, to have demand side market reform, reverse the supply side ones from the Conservative Party, make sure people's wages are rising, have a fairer economy that works for everybody, and of course tackling the climate crisis, which of course Rishi Sunak was talking about trying to be non-ideological about, even though of course they are being ideological in terms of how they plan to get votes. Anyway, that's it. Like and subscribe, do all of that nonsense. Join if 99p, people walking past making some noise here, as it would be in a departure lounge. But I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Hopefully the next video will be slightly less auspicious circumstances and I will be in a little quieter place. But I'll see you then, everybody. Take care.